Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, January 24th, 2025. President Donald Trump travels to western North Carolina to survey damage from Hurricane Helene and says he plans to sign an executive order to reform or get rid of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. President Trump also today going to Los Angeles, where deadly wildfires are still burning and causing massive damage. The president says he wants California to take two actions before that state receives federal disaster aid, implementing voter ID requirements and changing water management to make more water available to the LA region. Vice President JD Vance tells the annual anti-abortion March for Life rally in Washington, our country faces the return of the most pro-family, most pro-life American president of our lifetimes. Senate is on a path to confirm Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tonight and could be in session this weekend to confirm Homeland Security Secretary nominee Kristi Noem. Senate Democrats are using all the time available under the rules to delay confirmation votes on nominees they oppose but don't have the votes to stop. President Trump has signaled he will refuse to spend money already authorized by Congress, a practice called impoundment, even though there's a law that forbids that. We'll talk about it with Vox reporter Dylan Matthews. Plus, two new giant pandas make their debut at the National Zoo in Washington. From Associated Press, President Donald Trump said Friday that he was considering getting rid of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, offering the latest sign of how he is weighing sweeping changes to the nation's central organization for responding to disasters. Speaking while on the first trip of his second term, Trump made the comment in North Carolina during a briefing on the months-long recovery from Hurricane Helene. The Republican president said FEMA has been a very big disappointment. It's very bureaucratic and it's very slow. Other than that, we're very happy with them. Trump said that Michael Whatley, chair of the Republican National Committee, would help coordinate recovery efforts in the state, where frustrations over the storm continue to linger. Whatley is a North Carolina native, but does not hold an official government position. That was from the AP article. President Trump spoke at a briefing at the airport in Fletcher, North Carolina, not far from Asheville, about the devastation from the hurricane and the response from the Biden administration.
And I'll tell you, I've been to a lot of them, and this was like lots of hurricanes in one. I've never seen such damage done by water. And the water came, it was violent, and it left, and there was like nothing left. It's really pretty amazing. At one point, half of the emergency calls to FEMA went unanswered. That's real bad. FEMA was not doing their job. The city of Asheville went without running water for 2 months. A whistleblower testified that some FEMA employees refused to help people who displayed Trump signs on their property. I think that's true, isn't it? I read that. It's not nice. That's not too nice, is it? But whoever those property people were, thank you very much. Michael, is that true? That's not good, huh? About the property owners you put a Trump sign on and they wouldn't help? FEMA. Earlier this year, FEMA kicked 2,000 North Carolinians out of their temporary housing into below freezing temperatures. What was that all about? You know about that? What happened? Tell me.
We had an incompetent administration under Biden, and we had a disaster, and then we call it the disaster after the disaster. That was the FEMA response. You
had nothing but disaster since then. It doesn't matter at this point. Biden did a bad job. Some residents still don't have hot water, drinking water, or anything else, and many of them don't have quarters. They don't have anything. They got a stipend for what they lost, and we're going to take care of it. This is totally unacceptable, and I'll be taking strong action to get North Carolina the support that you need to quickly recover and rebuild. We're working on it very hard, and I think if Michael Whatley does half as good a job for North Carolina as he did for my campaign, we'll be very happy. Him and Laura were a very powerful team. So you think you can handle it, Michael? I don't know. I'm not sure, Michael.
President Donald Trump in Fletcher, North Carolina. Later in his remarks, he said that changes will be coming to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
I'll also be signing an executive order to begin the process of fundamentally reforming and overhauling FEMA, or maybe getting rid of FEMA. I think, frankly, FEMA is not good. I think when you have a problem like this, I think you want to go and, whether it's a Democrat or Republican governor, you want to use your state to fix it and not waste time calling FEMA. And then FEMA gets here and they don't know the area. They've never been to the area. And They want to give you rules that you've never heard about. They want to bring people that aren't as good as the people you already have. And FEMA's turned out to be a disaster. And you could go back a long way. You could go back to Louisiana. You could go back to some of the things that took place in Texas. It turns out to be the state that ends up doing the work. It just complicates it. I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away. And we pay directly. We pay a percentage to the state. But the state should fix this. If the state did this from the beginning, it would have been a lot better situation. I think you guys agree with that, right?
President Trump in Fletcher, North Carolina, sitting beside him, First Lady Melania Trump and Franklin Graham with the aid group Samaritan's Purse. Also there, members of Congress. President Trump also met with victims of Hurricane Helene and toured the hard-hit areas by air. A story from NC Newsline. The president was joined at the briefing by North Carolina Governor Josh Stein, a Democrat, with whom the president said he would have a very long and good relationship. In a statement, Stein thanked Trump for visiting, calling it a positive signal that his first visit was to North Carolina. He said he asked for $20 billion in additional relief, as well as another 6 months of full FEMA reimbursement. The statement did not address Trump's comments about getting rid of FEMA. That was from NC Newsline. From North Carolina, President Trump flying across the country to California. KTLA TV reports that President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump will be in Southern California Friday to view the recent wildfire devastation and discuss relief efforts amid a war of words with Governor Gavin Newsom. The president expected to land at Los Angeles International Airport Friday afternoon before heading to the Palisades fire burn area to take an aerial and walking tour of the damage. Trump is also expected to visit a fire station and participate in a roundtable discussion. The visit comes amid threats from Trump to withhold federal relief funding unless the state changes its water management policies. The president has blamed state and local officials for mismanaging water resources and firefighting efforts. That was from KTLA TV. Before the president left North Carolina, a reporter asked him about conditions for disaster aid in both North Carolina and California.
President, you talked about conditions being placed on aid to California, voter ID and the like. Are there any conditions that you're going to put on aid to North Carolina?
We're going to do a lot for North Carolina. They've been very slow. I don't know why it's been so bad. This has been one of the worst I've seen. Katrina, of course, was something that obviously that was a long time ago. That was not good. But this has been very slow. I don't know if that was for political reasons because they lost the state. Biden lost the state. Maybe he felt he doesn't care. Maybe there were other reasons. I don't know. But this has been very slow. By any standard, this has been very slow. And we're gonna make up for lost time.
No conditions you're going to push for aid.
Well, in California, I have a condition. In California, we want them to have voter ID so the people have a voice, because right now the people don't have a voice because you don't know who's voting, and it's very corrupt. And we also want them to release the water. If they released the water, they wouldn't have had a problem. If they released the water when I told them to, because I told them to do it 7 years ago, if they would have done it, you wouldn't have had the problem that you had. You might not have even had a fire. So, but here I don't have that. It's a different thing. You got hit by a storm. The people are incredible. They worked really well. Franklin was fantastic, and other groups. By the way, other groups came in that were also fantastic, and other states came in. Tennessee and a couple of others came in, and they really helped. That's the way it's supposed to be. No, this is a different kind of a thing.
President Donald Trump in North Carolina before he went to Southern California. Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat of California, says she and other Democratic and Republican members of Congress from California whose districts were affected by the wildfires will join President Trump at a recovery briefing. Also expected to be there, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, a Democrat. On Thursday in Pasadena, he announced he signed a law to spend $2.5 billion to help the Los Angeles area recover from the wildfires, covering the cost of helping people evacuate, temporary shelters, removing hazardous waste after the fires have done their damage. Governor Newsom also responded to President Trump's allegations that his policies caused the fires and have inhibited the fight against them.
The first action I took as governor of the state of California was an executive order to change procurement on vegetation and forest management. I followed it up 6 weeks later in Placer County and identified through a state of emergency, a declaration of emergency in Placer County, right near Auburn, California, to move 35 large-scale, high-profile projects to address the vulnerability of 200 communities. We've been at this for years and years and years, but I'll remind you of something that I know is inconvenient. We had the 3 driest years since statehood in 2020, 2021, 2022, followed by the wettest 3 weeks in our history that broke that drought. The extremes are unprecedented. There hasn't been a drop of rain of any significance, at least in 9 months here. It was 78 degrees down here. You had hurricane force winds, 99 miles an hour that these folks were fighting. These are unprecedented conditions, and these conditions are not unique to California, to your question. They persist around the globe and across the United States. And so we have to have a state of mind to be even more vigilant, more prepared, and more honest with ourselves about what's really happening. And that's why I'm not walking away from these commitments. And to the extent the President of the United States wants to come in tomorrow to support even more investments, we look forward to that. I embrace it. I thank him for any additional support he can provide with these record-breaking, unprecedented investments that the state has been making for 6 years straight.
California Governor Gavin Newsom, Democrat, on Thursday in Pasadena, California. CNN has an article. Advisors to Governor Newsom spent the week monitoring new White House advanced staffers' social media accounts, hoping for clues for where President Donald Trump might be headed when he lands in Los Angeles on Friday afternoon to talk about the wildfire damage. That's the state of relations as California and the federal government face one of the most expensive natural disasters ever and perhaps one of the most complex in American history. No one is talking between the Democratic governor's team and the newly inaugurated presidents. 2 people on the governor's team told CNN. This is Washington Today. You've been my savior, sustain. The annual March for Life took place today on the grounds of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. Thousands of pro-life activists attending a march that has been held since the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision that made abortion a constitutional right. And even though that decision was overturned in 2022 by the Dobbs decision, the march continues to be held at the anniversary of the Roe decision. Vice President JD Vance spoke about what he said was the Trump administration's goals to dismantle the Biden administration's aggressive and unpopular abortion agenda.
Yesterday, President Trump issued a strong endorsement of the Born Alive Abortion Act, ensuring that those babies who survived botched abortions enjoy the equal protection under law, which is the obligation of every citizen to enjoy in this country. With his return to office, no longer will the federal government direct FBI raids on the homes of people like Mark Houck and other Catholic and Christian activists who are fighting for the unborn every single day. And no longer will our government throw pro-life protesters and activists, elderly, grandparents, or anybody else in prison. It stopped on Monday, and we're not going to let it come back to this country. Instead, and I know you all saw the news, the 47th president has already issued pardons to those unjustly imprisoned. And I want to be clear that this administration stands by you, we stand with you, and most importantly, we stand with the most vulnerable and the basic principle that people exercising the right to protest on behalf of the most vulnerable should never have the government go after them ever again.
Vice President JD Vance at the March for Life rally in Washington, D.C. It was his first major public speech since taking office on Monday. He also spoke about what he says is his long-standing views against abortion.
Now, I hesitate to give you all advice because I can see there are young and old people who have been in the pro-life movement, some of you for longer than I've even been alive, and I'm grateful to you. But if I can offer one piece of advice, it's a piece of advice born out of my own experience. There was a point when I would get frustrated with people who didn't see what we saw. I would get frustrated that people could look at a picture of a baby on an ultrasound and see not a human being, but just a clump of cells. But one of the things that being a father has taught me, and one of the things that being in politics has taught me over the last couple of years, is that it is a blessing to know the truth, and the truth is that unborn life is worthy of protection. So please go forth, not with frustration, but with joy. We are joyful to march for life. We are joyful to know that that picture on an ultrasound, that is a picture of a baby with hopes and dreams and potential to come.
Vice President JD Vance at the March for Life rally in Washington. President Donald Trump spoke by video, saying we will again stand proudly for families and for life. Other Republican leaders in the House and the Senate were there in person. Associated Press writes abortion was largely absent from the stack of dozens of executive actions in Donald Trump's first days in office, but he has already made quieter moves on abortion, including pardoning several right-to-life activists and using wording related to fetal personhood in an executive order rolling back protections for transgender people. The president and CEO of the group Reproductive Freedom for All putting out a statement. President Trump, Vice President Vance, Speaker Johnson, and Senate Majority Leader Thune wouldn't be addressing this fringe extremist event if they didn't intend to enact its anti-abortion agenda, including ending abortion access nationwide. The American people voted to protect reproductive freedom, and the GOP's embrace of these anti-abortion extremists is proof positive that they couldn't care less. Americans deserve better, and make no mistake, we will make sure Trump and congressional Republicans remember this at the ballot box. That statement from Reproductive Freedom for All. The Senate, writes Punchbowl News, is poised for a rare late-night Friday vote to confirm Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary, as Republican leaders are making good on their promise to grind through President Donald Trump's cabinet nominees in the face of Democratic objections. Hegseth, who lost 2 Republican votes during a Thursday cloture vote, will likely be confirmed during a 9 p.m. Eastern vote series. Senate Majority Leader John Thune will then move to a cloture vote on Kristi Noem's nomination to lead the Department of Homeland Security. If no time is yielded back, Noem's confirmation vote would occur on Sunday morning. That was from Punchbowl News. Senator Thune spoke on the Senate floor this morning about these nominations.
Mr. President, over the next couple of days, the Senate will consider 2 more of the President's nominees. Kristi Noem to be Secretary of Homeland Security and Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. A former House member and current governor of the great state of South Dakota, Kristi brings both experience and commitment to her new role. Mr. President, one of the biggest challenges facing the Department of Homeland Security right now is securing our nation's border. 4 years of record-breaking illegal immigration at our southern borders left our country vulnerable to a whole host of security concerns, from terrorist entries to cross-border criminal activity like drug trafficking. Fixing this crisis and restoring respect for the rule of law is one of President Trump and Republicans' top priorities, and it's going to require a decisive and committed leader at the Department of Homeland Security. I believe Kristi has everything it takes to undertake this task. Mr. President, we're also considering the nomination of Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. A veteran of the Army National Guard who served tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, Mr. Hegseth will bring a warrior's perspective to the role of Defense Secretary and will provide much-needed fresh air at the Pentagon. Gone will be the days of woke distractions. The Pentagon's focus will be on war fighting. Mr. Hegseth will concentrate on restoring American strength and repairing the deficiencies in our readiness. As our first president said more than 200 years ago, and I quote, "To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace," end quote. And in a world that has grown increasingly unstable over the past few years, our priority has to be ensuring that the United States military is prepared to meet and defeat any threat. I will continue to ensure that the Senate works as quickly as possible to get President Trump's team in place.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, on the Senate floor. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, spoke this morning about Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth.
We all want what's best for our troops. We all know that voting for Secretary of Defense is one of the most important votes we're going to take all year. It mystifies me that of all the people President Trump could have nominated as Secretary of Defense, he picked someone as flawed, as deeply flawed, as Mr. Hegseth. Is Pete Hegseth really the best we have to lead the greatest military in the world? Is this man, with a history of excessive drinking, really the guy you want on the other end of the phone at 2 a.m. in a crisis, in control of the nuclear codes? Is this man, with a mile-long list of allegations of abusing, degrading, and harassing women, the one we want leading our men and women into battle? Is this man, who failed to manage the finances of veterans nonprofit groups, who drove his organizations into debt to the point where he could not even pay creditors, the person we want in charge of the Pentagon's budget? I want this last point to sink in. DoD is a colossal organization. It has a workforce of 3 million people, an annual budget of over $850 billion. Is Pete Hegseth really the person we want overseeing an organization as complex as DoD? A man who couldn't even manage the finances of a small nonprofit, and yet they pick him. It's unbelievable. And he was pressured to resign of these small nonprofits. And now he's supposed to run the Department of Defense with its millions of people under his jurisdiction and billions of dollars. The odds are not low that he'd mismanage the Pentagon's budget if he mismanaged small organizations. Worst of all, his erratic behavior could rear its ugly head. Because we know when people who have a history of erratic behavior go into high-pressure situations, it often makes them more, not less erratic.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, this morning on the Senate floor. Again, a vote to confirm Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary expected tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern. And if no senator changes his or her vote from the successful procedural vote on this nomination on Thursday, Pete Hegseth will be confirmed. Then the Senate will move to the nomination of Kristi Noem for Homeland Security Secretary, and if all the time available under the rules is used, a vote to confirm her would take place on Sunday. From Forbes magazine, President Donald Trump signed an executive order blocking funds that Congress has already authorized, including signature Biden plans on infrastructure and climate change, which Trump and his allies argue he can do, though critics point to a federal law forbidding it. Trump has long suggested he wants to halt federal spending that Congress has authorized, known as impoundment, saying in a 2023 campaign video he wants to use impoundment to squeeze the bloated federal bureaucracy for massive savings. That was from Forbes magazine. In a moment, we will talk with a Vox reporter about this. First, impoundment came up this week when the president's nominee for White House Budget Director Russell Vought testified before the Senate Budget Committee. Here are the questions from Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland.
Will you comply with the Impoundment Control Act?
Senator, the president ran against the Impoundment Control Act.
This is, Mr. Vought, I know what the president did. He wants to change lots of things. He can submit legislation to do that. But you are going to be the head of OMB, and here today at this hearing, you're refusing to commit to comply with the Impoundment Control Act. Is that right? Are you refusing to commit to complying?
Senator, the administration has to go through a policy process to understand the legal parameters for operating in the ICA.
Okay, I'm going to reclaim my time. I'm sorry. I was just, it seems that complying with the current law, even if you disagree with it, would result in a clear answer. Yes, I will comply with the current law, including the Impoundment Control Act.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, questioning Russell Vought, nominated to be White House Budget Director at Wednesday's Senate Budget Committee hearing. And joining us now to talk about President Trump's plans on withholding money approved by Congress is Dylan Matthews, Vox senior correspondent and lead writer. Thank you for being with us. Let's start at the beginning. What is the Impoundment Control Act?
So the Impoundment Control Act was a law that Congress passed in 1974 in response to some sort of abuses during the Nixon administration. So the Nixon administration had a bunch of priorities in terms of cutting back on anti-poverty programs, cutting back on some environmental stuff that the Democratic Congress did not share. They decided to use impoundment, or just refusing to spend some of the money that Congress had appropriated. This eventually sort of got litigated up all the way to the Supreme Court, but before it even reached the Supreme Court, Congress passed a law basically saying that the president can't do that and clarifying that that's illegal. And setting up a process where if the president does want to decline to spend some amount of money that Congress has appropriated, they can issue a request to Congress and Congress can agree with it. But unless they go through that process, then the president is acting illegally under the law.
Has the Impoundment Control Act ever been tested in court? So
the closest we got to a test of the Impoundment Control Act was the first time that Donald Trump was president, and when Russ Vought, his current nominee, was also head of the Office of Management and Budget, and tried to use impoundment authority to block a bunch of different kinds of spending. There was some foreign aid spending, but most notably some military aid to Ukraine in 2019. And this was the aid that Trump was allegedly holding up in exchange to pressure Ukraine to investigate the Biden family, which was the basis of the first impeachment of Trump. And it did not make it to court, in part because Vought sort of blinked and released the money eventually. But the Government Accountability Office, GAO, which is responsible for enforcing the Impoundment Control Act, ruled that they had acted illegally. And that was important and I think the most serious ruling of that kind. That being said, it hasn't made it to actual courts. Like the GAO by custom enforces this. The GAO can't throw anybody in jail. It can't issue an injunction. And so there's definitely a lot more ways that it could be tested going forward.
Has President Trump said how extensively he would like to impound funds?
Yes. So I think Trump, and more specifically his team, within which I would include Russ Vought, but also Mark Paletta, who was general counsel to Vought during the first term, and I expect to come back in some capacity, has been very, very vocal that they think you can use impoundment power pretty sweepingly. I think Paletta in particular has written fairly detailed articles laying out his views on this, and has said that he thinks that as a general rule, the president has the right to spend less on anything that Congress appropriates than they appropriate it. That one way he's put it is that the budgetary amounts put forward by Congress are ceilings rather than floors. So if they appropriate, say, $30 billion to a veterans program, it's not illegal for the administration to only spend $25 billion, but it is illegal for it to spend $35 billion. This is, suffice it to say, a very, very different view of impoundment power than I think most legal academics and most courts have had throughout American history.
We're talking with Dylan Matthews, Vox senior correspondent. We've heard from Democrats in Congress saying that they would not approve of this, but how about the Republican leadership?
I have not heard anything from Mike Johnson, from Tom Cole, the head of House Appropriations. There are some, I think, more Gadfly members like Mike Lee in the Senate who have sort of spoken out against the Impoundment Control Act. But this has really been an executive forward push, which makes sense, right? Like the goal of undermining the Impoundment Control Act is to concentrate more power over spending in the White House, in the executive. And beyond being a tool for Donald Trump, it sort of increases the power of the White House relative to Congress. And so I would expect certainly some longer-term members, and Tom Cole, who's currently chair of Appropriations, has been there for a very long time, to be skeptical on kind of where you sit is where you stand grounds, that you might be a Republican, but he's a member of the House and believes that the House has the power of the purse, as it traditionally does, which is a principle that the impoundment push from Trump threatens.
And finally, your article at Vox.com has the headline that this could be the most powerful tool that President Trump has. We're talking about it now. Some members of Congress are talking about it. Do you think in the near future this will be on the American public's mind, that this will come to the fore, that this is going to be a controversy?
So among the slew of executive orders that Trump issued on his first day in office was one sort of calling on the Office of Management and Budget to use its authority of apportionment, and I think you can fairly call this impoundment, to hold up foreign aid spending for the next 90 days. Like many of those executive orders, I expect that to be litigated in court, but to me it was sort of a clear starting sign that they already want to use this authority. And I think especially if and when Roswad is confirmed to head OMB, I would expect this to be a major push of his. So you're going to hear the word impoundment a lot over the next couple of years. I feel pretty safe in predicting.
Dylan Matthews, Vox senior correspondent and lead writer. You can find his articles at vox.com and on X at Dylan Matt. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, spoke about impoundment at another hearing this week. House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee looking at railroads.
Before I go into my questions, I want to express my concern again about President Trump's hastily and poorly drafted executive order that froze a substantial portion of critical bipartisan infrastructure law funding. Despite the White House drafting memos and OMB trying to clarify, states are still being told that their approved funding for bridges and highways is on pause. I remain concerned that the White House triggered an entirely avoidable crisis, and I urge the White House to finally clean up this mess.
Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, at a House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee hearing this week. On Wall Street, the Dow down 140, S&P down 17, NASDAQ down 99. Washington today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Story from BBC News: the United Kingdom should be excluded from the tariffs Donald Trump is threatening to impose on exports to the U.S., the business secretary has said. Jonathan Reynolds told the BBC that the U.S. has no goods trade deficit with the U.K., which occurs when a country imports more than it exports. President Trump has doubled down on his threat to impose big tariffs on countries that sell products in the U.S. Reynolds said, "I think we've got an argument to engage with." Reporting from BBC News, President Trump was asked about this during his visit today to Asheville, North Carolina.
Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary of the United Kingdom, said that there's an even trade between the U.S. and the U.K., so they shouldn't have tariffs. Does trade imbalances or a balanced trade affect tariffs and your decisions?
Yeah, unbalance and balance, and also deficits. Like with Canada, we lose $200 billion a year with Canada. That's because we allow them to make cars. We allow them to take lumber. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their food products because we make the same products right on the other side of the border. It's sort of crazy. So we've just allowed that. Bad management has allowed it over the last 4 years in particular to become very imbalanced. And I said I call him Governor Trudeau, but he's Prime Minister Trudeau when he was Prime Minister. I asked him, why would we do that? Why? And he was unable to give me an answer. He said, I don't know. And I said, do you think it's fair that we're paying $200 billion to keep Canada going? And what would happen? I asked him, what would happen if we didn't do that, if we didn't subsidize Canada? He said, we'd be a failed nation. And I said, then you should be a state. Because why are we paying all of that money to Canada when, we could use it ourselves, right? So we take care of their military. We're going to order about 40 Coast Guard big icebreakers, big ones. And all of a sudden, Canada wants a piece of the deal. They say, why are we doing that? I mean, I like doing that if they're a state, but I don't like doing that if they're a nation. Also, they've been very nasty to us on trade. Historically, Canada has been very, very bad to us, very unfair to us on trade. So we'll see how it all works out.
President Trump answering reporters' questions in Asheville, North Carolina during a briefing on aid to hurricane victims. Associated Press writes the leader of Ontario, Canada's most populous province, said Friday he would call an early election because he says he needs a mandate to fight U.S. President Donald Trump's threatened tariffs. Premier Doug Ford of the Progressive Conservative Party said that he planned to make the announcement on Wednesday. The move would send Ontarians to the polls on February 27th, more than a year before the June 2026 fixed election date. Ford already has a large majority government. Ford, who is the equivalent of a U.S. state governor, said that Ontario could lose upwards of 500,000 jobs should Trump follow through on his 25% tariff threat. Reporting from AP. The president's threat of tariffs on all goods not manufactured in the U.S. and higher tariffs on goods from certain countries, such as Canada, Mexico, and China, has been a big topic of discussion this week at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. 2 U.S. state governors spoke about it on Thursday. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Republican of Arkansas, and Andy Beshear, Democrat of Kentucky. The moderator is Andrew Sorkin, editor-at-large and columnist with the New York Times.
What is your expectation, of the possibility of tariffs and whether they are a negotiating tool or something else?
I think certainly the president, look, I think one of the really important things to look at is this isn't his first time. He's now coming in having been president before, and he knows some of the tools that he has in his toolbox that he was able to use successfully. And we saw a really strong economy under President Donald Trump. We saw relationships across the globe, in many cases, strengthen. Even if they didn't always like the way he said it and the way he went about it, it's hard to argue that his policies weren't effective and didn't make our country stronger. And so I think it's one of those things that he will use as a tool in his toolbox, and something that he can use and leverage in negotiations. At the end of the day, he is the ultimate deal maker. And I think that it is something that he will use as he's going about trying to make sure America comes out as.
Are you in the same camp? The only reason I mention this is there's another view, which is that it has to be a toll booth. And that there's a toll booth because when it comes to the budget and the deficit in the United States, that this may be a tool not just to negotiate with other countries, but a tool to collect revenue.
Well, and parts of the administration just said that publicly. I think that when you look at this, these threatened tariffs aren't about trade imbalance. They're about leverage. Why? Because President Trump has been very clear that they're about leverage. But the impacts could go right to the reasons that he was elected, and could have some significant impact on that very quickly. So there's a threat of a 25% tariff on Canada. Well, that'll raise gas prices. There's a threat of a 25% tariff on Mexico. Well, that'll raise food prices. And when you look at the politics of inflation, what are the two things that Americans see? Well, first on every corner is gas prices, and then in the grocery store it is food prices. And so I think as the world watches, it's going to be important to know what the leverage being sought is, and not just following, say, a trade imbalance, but looking at what the objective is and whether or not there are any steps being taken or moving between the two countries to know whether that tariff is likely to come to be.
Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Republican of Arkansas, and Governor Andy Beshear, Democrat from Kentucky, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland on Thursday. Today at the forum, Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank, spoke about President Trump's tariff threat.
President Lagarde, President Trump yesterday said that the EU does not treat the U.S. fairly on trade and that he has some big complaints. Is that true?
This is a true or false question, by the way.
Is it true that the EU has not been fair with the U.S.?
There is no way I can say yes or no, okay? What I believe is that he's looking very carefully at surplus versus deficit in the current account, and in the trade balance in particular, focusing on that. And I think that you have to look very carefully under the hood, as Kristalina was saying. You have to look at the goods exchanges, you have to look at the services exchanges, you have to look at the capital account. It cannot just be black and white. What is true is that there has to be negotiations, there has to be trade relationships that are organized in a framework that is giving confidence to the partners. It cannot be about, removing all the rules, ignoring the institutions. The world has, 190 plus countries that are members of the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, 191. And it's about all of us operating together, as Tharman said earlier on. So, yes, you sit at the table, yes, you negotiate, yes, some countries are in a stronger position than others, but we all need each other. If there is one thing that the Europeans have learned over the course of time since the end of the Second World War, is that you cannot go alone. You have to work together. You have to respect each other's, and you have to understand each other's. For that, you sit at the table and you work, and I would not say enough about the strength of institutions. Any literature that you have about stability, about economic equilibrium, always reminds us that institutions have a huge value and that frameworks are here for players to know the rules of the game. And whether you look at trade, whether you look at financial regulations, I know that Basel III is in play, but there are values in having frameworks. There are values in all banks around the world learning and understanding and appreciating that having safeguards, having rules vis-a-vis each other's actually matters, and the best can win, but within a set of rules. That's how the world has to operate.
A lot of agreement here in this room.
Christine Lagarde, President, European Central Bank, on a panel at the World Economic Forum in Davos, looking at the global economic outlook. The moderator was Sarah Eisen, anchor with CNBC. Kindergartners from the Washington Yuling Bilingual Public Charter School performing at the National Zoo. WUSA-TV in Washington reports that giant pandas Bao Li and Qing Bao made their public debut at the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute on Friday. Zoo workers and city officials held a special ceremony to unveil the pandas to the public, declaring the zoo the District of Panda. Smithsonian Institution Secretary Lonnie Bunch was there.
As Secretary of the Smithsonian, I am so pleased to welcome you to this amazingly joyous occasion. I'm pleased because, I think we all felt that sense of loss when the pandas left last year. But I'm also pleased because I did not want to be known as a secretary that lost the pandas. So for me, this is really an amazing, joyous moment. And I think it's a moment not to remember where we once were, but to celebrate where we are now, to celebrate our new arrivals. We are delighted to invite the public to meet and enjoy our wonderful new pandas, Qing Bao and Bao Li. The Smithsonian giant pandas have been a presence in Washington for more than 50 years. In some ways, they are as iconic as the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial. People love the pandas because the pandas make us smile and they bring us together. We are so pleased that so many people around the nation will get a chance to enjoy and engage the pandas, whether by coming to the zoo or by going to the panda cam and seeing them in their classrooms or in their homes. And I'm so honored to share this moment with Mayor Bowser, who is a great supporter of the Smithsonian and somebody I know comes to the zoo regularly. And I want to acknowledge the central role that Ambassador Xia has played in helping to facilitate the return of the pandas. For more than 50 years, it's important that the Smithsonian has worked with our Chinese colleagues to help ensure the preservation of the pandas. Our joint work to understand the habitat, the biology, the behavior of these amazing animals had led to breakthroughs in helping to preserve the species. I'm proud that we've trained more than 1,500 wildlife professionals and students in China. The cooperation between our scientists has increased and stabilized panda populations. And our work has provided valuable insights into not just how do you protect giant pandas, but how do you protect all the wildlife that share their habitat. But I'll tell you, all the essential science aside, and I know Brandy is crucially important to all the science, to me, let me use the scholarly vernacular. The pandas are the coolest thing I know.
Lonnie Bunch, Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, at today's ceremony at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. The Chinese ambassador to the U.S., Xie Feng, spoke about the mutual love of giant pandas to help international relations.
Protecting pandas is protecting Mother Nature, and embracing pandas is embracing peace and friendship. The gentle and cute bears should not be demonized, nor should mutually beneficial panda cooperation be politicized. Some Chinese citizens commented that there is nothing a panda cannot fix, and if there is, then let's have two. American friends told me that they are simply biologically programmed to like giant pandas. Our shared love for pandas has deepened my conviction that China and the United States have much more in common than what divides us. And whenever I think of what we have achieved on panda cooperation, I will feel more confident that as long as we work together, we can make big, great things happen to the benefit of both our countries and the world.
Chinese ambassador to the United States, Xie Feng, at the National Zoo debut of the two giant pandas. An article in The Guardian. The 3-year-old pandas Qingbao, whose name means green treasure in Mandarin, and Baoli, whose name means active and vital power, arrived in the U.S. from China last October, making them the first pandas to come to D.C. from China in 24 years. Thank you for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. It's free. And get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. That's cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.